Hi, it's Tim Grant.
And Nicci McLeod from the Writing Wrongs podcast.
We wanted to let you know about a really exciting event that we've been planning, a Writing Wrongs live episode. On October the 22nd, you can come along and be part of the Writing Wrongs live event.
Yes, that's right, and we are having a live recording as part of the ESRC Festival of Social Science right here in Birmingham.
At Writing Wrongs, we are fortunate enough not to need sponsorship. We've been wholly funded by Aston University and the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics. But we're delighted to have secured funding from the British Government's Economic and Social Research Council, the ESRC, to host a live event as part of their Festival of Social Science. This means that Writing Wrongs Live is completely free to attend. All you have to do is get here.
At the event, we are going to trace the origins and development of forensic linguistics in the UK. There's going to be discussion of cases, a broader look at forensic linguistics research, and if you come along, you can put your questions and be part of the event.
Writing Wrongs Live will be recorded on October the 22nd between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. and the show will be released to listen to as usual on the first Friday of the next month. That's Friday the 7th of November.
We'll be holding Writing Wrongs Live at a fantastic venue, the Steelhouse Lane Lockup. It's an old Victorian prison right in the middle of Birmingham, and our hosts there will be the West Midlands Police Museum. Come along and you can have a good look around, get locked in a police cell, and try on police uniforms from throughout the ages.
To sign up to Writing Wrongs Live, go to our website by searching for Writing Wrongs Aston, or go direct to www.aston.ac.uk/writing-wrongs.
Writing Wrongs Live is being recorded October the 22nd between 4 and 6 p.m, and you can sign up for free. We are really looking forward to seeing you there. Do come along.
Hi, it's Tim Grant.
And Nicci McLeod from the Writing Wrongs podcast. This is the series finale, which is where we'll be answering some of the questions that you have been sending in over the course of Series 1.
We've got a good selection of questions on a range of topics, and we'll do our best to tackle these and have some discussion around the issues they throw up.
We hope you enjoy the show.
Writing Wrongs, an original podcast series from the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics, Season 1, Episode 8, Questions and Answers.
Hello and welcome to Writing Wrongs, the podcast from AIFL, the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University. We're all about improving the delivery of justice through the analysis of language. I'm Professor Tim Grant.
And I'm Dr. Nicci McLeod, Deputy Director of AIFL.
So Nicci, what sorts of questions have listeners been sending in?
Well, we've had all sorts of questions, and they've also come from lots of different sources. So obviously we've been advertising our email address at the end of every episode, and lots of really good questions came in through that method. I know you've had some responses on LinkedIn to particular sort of clips and particular episodes that have spurred people to ask questions. And some of these have been kind of quite general questions about forensic linguistics and the work that we do. But we've also had some that have been kind of quite specific to the episodes that we've had over the course of the series. Okay, so let's dive into our first question. And this is from Caroline, Tim, your piano teacher. And she asks, how do you get cases as forensic linguists? And she's referring here to the Andrea Nini episode where he got involved with the Ayia Napa rape case, almost kind of by accident, that the legal team kind of sought him out. And she's asking, is that typical, or how does this kind of thing usually work?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Caroline. And Caroline's an excellent piano teacher, and my piano playing is woeful, but it's not her fault. It's all on me. So how do we get cases as forensic linguists? So there's sort of two parts to this, I think. There's first of all, how do you become a forensic linguist, and who would be a forensic linguist? And quite often when we do schools talks and the like, we're asked, how do you become a forensic linguist from A-level students and so on. And there's a mixture of academic backgrounds that are helpful. So obviously you need English language or linguistics or some related discipline to that. You need to have skills as language description. And then alongside that, it can be useful to study subjects like psychology or criminology or sociology. And I always add in computer science or maths. If you've got the linguistics and some criminology and some computer science or maths, then that's the ideal combination, I feel, for a forensic linguist. You might disagree, Nicci. Then you need a degree in linguistics. And then not all forensic linguists will have a master's in forensic linguistics because they're fairly rare. There's only a few universities that offer masters, including, of course, ourselves at Aston.
Aston University has a very strong master's program in forensic linguistics.
Yes, and this is our advertising break. Yeah, no, but that's good. It's true. But most practitioner forensic linguists, certainly in the UK and to some degree worldwide, will also have a PhD, a research degree in an area relevant to forensic linguistics. So that is the sort of the starting point. And then it's quite hard to actually set up shop, set up a website and become known to clients for forensic linguists. So there's sort of 2 or 3 sources of clients that contact me at least. So the first would be police forces or sort of government agencies or something like that, investigators. And they do hold official lists of experts of different sorts, and forensic linguists will be on those lists. And I know some of us get cases those ways.
Yeah, they've got to know what they're looking for, haven't they? That's the thing. They have this big database with experts on, but unless they've heard of a forensic linguist, then what are they going to search for? They might search for communication expert. They might, and it's just sheer luck, really, that if they find it.
Yes, and I know. So, for example, one example of this is that the British police establishment have what they call an expert advisor database. So if you're a police officer and you've got a problem in an investigation where you're trying to sort of identify who wrote something, you might not have heard of forensic linguistics, but you can phone up this sort of helpline and they'll tell that police detective how they can, that the forensic linguistics exists, and they've got a list of people that they can put them in touch with. So that kind of system does exist if you're on the official side of the fence. If it's criminal cases and you're working for the defence, and if it's civil cases, it's much more word of mouth, and it's much more people find websites, listen to podcasts, see Nicci on TV on the Expert Witness show, and so on and so forth. So it is a little bit haphazard, and we're still in the process of making forensic linguistics known as a forensic science. I guess one thing that I never do is take a case unless there's a solicitor or legal team involved. Same. So I have a few rules about cases I'll take. So first of all, I'll never make a case for someone. I will look at the data and give my honest opinion.
Yeah.
I will, and a solicitor will understand that I see that as my role, whereas a private client may not.
Yeah.
I do nothing about marital cases and divorces. Okay. I have been asked quite a lot can you just look at this for me? I think my partner's cheating on me. Look at these text messages. No, I choose not to. And you might find forensic linguists who are willing to take those cases. There's probably a lucrative market in that direction, but not for me. And so on and so forth. So the main way we would get cases is, or the only way I would take cases is through a solicitor. Now, in the Alberich case, what Andrea Nini said is that a student of his saw the case on TV, went to him and said, "Oh, this sounds like forensic linguistics." And Andrea wrote to the journalist who'd written the story, and the journalist then passed the message on to the legal team who got back in touch with Andrea.
Yeah.
And so that was slightly roundabout, but we do get cases more directly than that. And often it's people we've worked for before have passed on the name to a colleague, another lawyer or barrister or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, very thorough answer there. So should we move on to the next question?
Yes, Nick, and this one's for you because it's about police interviewing. This is a slightly more anonymous question. I don't think deliberately so, but that's fine. We see a lot of TV shows and films with police interviews that see suspects using no comment in response to any question from the police officer. And so the question is this something that happens a lot? Do you see a lot of no comment interviews, or is it just a Hollywood trope?
It is very, very common because of the nature of my research. I've been to sort of collect lots of police interview data, listen to loads and loads, hours and hours of audio recordings of interviews with suspects. And it's very, very common for the suspect to reply no comment to every single question that's put to them. And this is entirely their right. They are entitled to do this. It's the right to silence is protected by law. It's protected by common law, but also the European Convention on Human Rights. I've actually heard that I've heard kind of at the beginning of interviews, I've heard police officers say to the suspect, if you don't want to answer the question, then can you say no comment? It's kind of a polite way of saying, or it's a polite way of ignoring us, basically. So it's registering that the question has been heard, but refusing to give an answer. Whereas obviously if they actually did respond with complete silence, there would always be the danger that they hadn't actually heard the question or whatever. So so a polite way of ignoring us is how I've heard it described. We can't kind of assume silence to imply any kind of guilt, and certainly the police officers can't do that. It's not like you can charge somebody who hasn't said anything. You can't charge them on the basis of them refusing to answer the question. Equally, in court, you can't find someone guilty on the basis of having refused to answer the question.
So that's definitely true, but also the UK police caution allows the court to draw an adverse inference if you don't mention something that you later rely on in court. So this is the cost of a no comment interview, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. So if you've not sort of mentioned something and then later on in court you sort of say, well, I don't know, produce an alibi, for example, for the time at which a particular offence happened, then obviously that would then kind of the court or the jury are allowed to then draw inferences like, why would you not have mentioned that at the time that you were being questioned. But there are lots of reasons why you might want to give a no comment interview. If you don't feel like you've had sufficient time to give a considered answer, if you want a bit more sort of time to think about it, you don't want to be rushed. And then obviously further down the line, if you do want to deny things, it's much easier to do that if you haven't got anything on the record for the police to sort of draw attention to holes in what you might have previously said as compared to what you say later. So if there's nothing on the record, then those kinds of denials later are much, much easier. I think on the balance of it, really, if I was arrested on suspicion of offence, I think I would give a no comment interview.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you get a solicitor, that will often be their advice.
Yes, they will.
Initially, say nothing at all, do no comment until you hear the case against you.
Yes.
And there's a bit of a tussle back and forth between the police and the competent defence solicitor, because the police will do the interview in stages if it's a serious offence. And so they will go away and plan, and then they'll introduce a new bit of evidence, and they'll go away and plan and introduce a new bit of evidence. And if you can no comment your way all the way through that, and then provide a written statement at the end of your account for the evidence they put against you, that's a strong defence strategy.
Very strong.
And very often the saying or the myth or something like that is it's the innocent who are most vulnerable, because they don't think of doing no comment interviews. They want to explain themselves, and they can get themselves tangled in knots. And actually, even if you're innocent of something you've been accused of, doing a no comment interview until you understand the case against you is often the best strategy.
Yeah. I mean, if there's a very strong case against you already, there's lots of pieces of evidence, and you know that there's lots of pieces of evidence, you know that a strong case has been built against you, then perhaps no comment isn't really the way to go. But until you actually know that, and you know what they've got on you, essentially, it may well be the best.
And again, that competent defence solicitor will tell you, look, this is a really strong case, and then maybe you want to mitigate the next steps, which might mean going to court and being prosecuted by making an early admission or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. So our next question, this is from Joe Koenig, and we're actually going to hear from Joe. He actually sent in his question for us to hear. And this is in response to something that Andrea Nini said in episode 7. So we've mentioned this episode already. This is the Ayia Napa rape trial. And we've got Andrea talking here about the difference between a behavioural profiler and a forensic linguist. So let's hear what Andrea said in that episode.
That's a very important distinction to draw. So, because when we hear profiling, we probably, that's the kind of profiling that we would think about would be psychological profiling or behavioral analysis. But the kind of profiling that linguists would do is quite different. So it wouldn't deal at all with psychology. So it's not the case that we would examine a text to say anything about the state of mind of the person writing this text, or the personality of the person who wrote this text, or their intentions, but simply just looking at things like, the dialect that is being used, so the choice of words, the choice of grammatical constructions, and what they can say about, for example, their place of where they grew up, so where they learned language.
Okay, so in response to this, we had Joe Koenig, who questioned whether that distinction was actually kind of completely accurate. And this is what he had to say.
I'm Joe Koenig, a forensic linguist in Michigan, USA. I've written 2 books on forensic linguistics, Getting the Truth, published in 2014, and Getting the Truth, IMDb Cooper, published in 2019, both books published by Principia Media. Here's my question. Every element in a communication, for example, words, facial expressions, utterances, is the result of a communicator's decision to use that specific element to communicate their message. If the communicator leaves out an obvious or expected element, that too is a decision. What is there is important. What isn't there may be more important. Therefore, I feel the person's selection of a communication element or non-selection reflects their intent, their attitude, their emotions. So a forensic linguist may be able to deduce a communicator's intent, attitude, and/or emotion based upon the forensic analysis of a person's communication. Thank you.
So Joe there saying that as linguists we can make comments on intent and so on.
Yeah, so I find this a really, really interesting question. And I'm going to set out my stall first.
Mm-hmm.
So I never offer an opinion on things like deception. It sounds from his books like Joe does a lot of work on deceptive communication. I don't give opinions on threat analysis. So there's a very valuable question that could be answered on if you receive a threatening communication, is someone likely to carry out the threat, and are they likely to do so imminently? Yeah, so these are real important forensic questions. My strategy, if I get asked to do this, is always to work alongside a forensic psychologist, a behavioral expert, and an expert in individual psychology. And where I've done this a lot, and there's various people I've worked alongside, I will do the linguistic profile where I might be able to write a little pen picture about who the writer is, and allow the psychologist to do the threat analysis and the detecting deception piece. And for me, these are at the edges of forensic linguistics. I'm fascinated by the question, though, and because I'm fascinated by it, I've actually supervised quite a set of PhDs in detecting deception through linguistic analysis and in threat analysis. So we heard from Marlon Hurt, who was an ex-PhD student of mine, just talking about a police interview case that was in Series 1. And his PhD was on threat analysis against threats against third parties, for example. So there is forensic linguistic research in these directions that is well-founded. He passed his PhD with excellent comments from the examiners and so on. And I've had another PhD as well, Picanal, who did work on deceptive statements and so on. I, as an individual forensic linguist, wouldn't go there. My position is that forensic linguistics is 99% detailed language description. And the less we give opinions that are deductions from that description, the better. And that makes stronger evidence in court. As expert witnesses, we are allowed to give opinions in court, but we should almost never do so, is my view.
That's right.
And so I wouldn't take these cases. Obviously, deception is communicated through language and threat is communicated through language. And there's a borderline fuzzy area, which you might call sort of communicative intent, which is about sort of what the speaker intends that you can infer somewhat. But I think it's a slippery slope into claiming expertise in psychology that we don't have.
On that subject, we've got an episode coming up in Series 2, haven't we, where we talked to Professor Jack Grieve about fake news and the fact that because somebody producing fake news has a different communicative intent to that of somebody who's producing genuine, honest news, that may be reflected in differences in the language. But we're talking about something slightly different there.
Yeah, I think that's a specific model of deception. And Jack's the book he's written on this is really convincing, right? He is finding language differences that are real. I don't think you could read the text and say this one's fake and this one's real.
No, that's
it's
right.
a statistical level.
Yeah, it's not a sort of one size fits all. We very much need to sort of look at these on a kind of case by case basis, and the context is going to be different in every case.
Would you take cases of this sort? Is it something that's in your...
I absolutely wouldn't, and I also kind of roll my eyes if a student comes to me and says they want to write their master's dissertation on deception detection. I kind of go, oh no, I don't. I try and steer them away from it. I think a big part of it is that I just think that it is so easy for this kind of information to be misapplied, and to be if it gets into the wrong hands, it can be really high stakes, the kind of effects that it could have. That if people kind of start running away with the idea that somebody that does this particular language behavior is definitely lying, then that could have horrendous kind of knock-on effects, and it's something that I don't particularly want to be involved with.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder as well if there is a US-UK distinction here. So I believe, I don't know, but I believe things like the polygraph are much more widely used in the USA than they are in Britain. They do have some use in the UK, which is still pretty controversial. For me, it's the same problem that in experimental studies, you might separate out people who have true utterances and false utterances with a polygraph. But the specific, that's a statistical finding, and the specifics in a specific case make it really hard to say this person is lying in this instance. Yeah. And there's lots of different explanations from the behavioral or the physiological or the linguistic changes that aren't deception. Yes. Someone might be more stressed. Someone might be being interviewed for the first time by police, so be really careful with their word selection. Yeah. And that might change their linguistic output. So we're not casting shade on Joe and his work. We don't know that well enough, but I'm more with Andrea, and it may be no coincidence that Andrea is of this school, of the UK Forensic Linguistics School, and literally of Aston University, where he did his PhD. So he may have learned this from our attitudes. But we're much more cautious than that. But it's great to hear always the breadth of opinion in forensic linguistics and how that operates across the world. Yeah,
yes, it is. It's good to hear these kind of perspectives from other jurisdictions. It's always really, really interesting to hear that.
So that's a great question to raise. I don't think we've quite answered it, but at least we've sort of explained our position a little. So Nicci, let's move on to a question for you, which is, have you ever sat in on the rest of a trial because you wanted closure to find out what happened? And there's a follow-up, which is, and why is there not more protection for experts giving evidence in court?
Right. So I actually haven't ever sat in for the remainder of a trial, mainly because, well, I mean, it's never sort of fitted in, and you know that you're going to get an update from if you're working for the prosecution, then your police liaison or contact will let you know the outcome of the case. If you're working for the defence, then your contact there will let you know the outcome. So no, that's never actually happened to me. But in response to this sort of second part to the question, though, about protection for experts giving evidence, so I think this certainly was a very relevant question for me during the Jordan Barkley trial. So this was the murder of Dalton Powell, where I think I mentioned during the episode that there were all sort of 6 or 7 defendants were all in the dock kind of looking down at me as I was giving evidence, when literally all the ordinary witnesses in that trial had received special measures. They had a screen to kind of protect their identity from the defendants. They received all the kind of special measures that they're entitled to, of course, because there was a high chance of them being intimidated by the defendants, by the defendants' associates, and so they needed to be assisted to give the best evidence they could. And obviously I didn't receive any of those. And I guess I've kind of been thinking about this question, and I suppose there's a large part of it a large part of me comes down on thinking that this is an occupational hazard. This is kind of the choice that I've made, is to put myself into this position in a way that those ordinary witnesses didn't make any kind of choices. They just happened to be there on the night. In that sense, I kind of think that no, I shouldn't be entitled to the same. But at the same time, it can be quite scary, and there have been times where I've sort of been not scared for my safety, but concerned, shall we say, and kind of had to sort of make sure that security are aware that this TV show is about to come out, and that this may stir up a lot of old feeling about among a group that may well have forgotten about this until they've seen it on BBC, and then all comes up again.
I have similar feelings. And there are cases that I don't publicise my part in because that feels like a foolish thing to do if someone feels really dangerous. Once or twice I've asked the police, and there have been formal risk assessments carried out. And it's interesting because I was most worried about a terrorism case. And in that case, the police said, no, you're too small. Okay. Yeah, you're just a lab worker. Yeah. They were there. These guys wouldn't be interested in you. And they were. And the other time I asked for a risk assessment, it was much more a drugs gang that was relatively local to both where we work and where I live, and so on. And I said, this is a bit close to home, and so on. And they said, yeah, just keep a low profile. Yeah, you'll appear for your day in court and come away. But so I've not done a TV show about that.
No.
So this does occur, but I agree. We're offering ourselves up to deliver a service to a court. It's very different from an ordinary witness. I guess the other thing I've done in terms of finding out the end of the story is I was involved in a very big case against a man called Matthew Folder, who was a multiple abuser, and he actually pleaded guilty. But I went to the sentencing hearing to hear both the victim statements and the sort of the statements he made through his lawyers in that sentencing hearing in mitigation, which were very few actually. And it felt on that case I needed a little bit of closure. So by going to that sentencing hearing, I felt it gave me that end of a story.
That was a really serious kind of horrific multiple victims international case, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And so one thing I'm interested in as a sort of an academic is researcher and caseworker well-being. And although the nature of that case was, nothing like as traumatic to me as it was to the victims, we did spend our time reading through an awful lot of really awful material for months on end. And it felt like it had seeped into my soul and I needed some kind of closure. So actually, I did go to that hearing too.
Okay. So let's move on to our next question. And this is one that comes from Nilda on LinkedIn. So this is via your LinkedIn page, Tim. And she says she's a cognitive neuroscience researcher. And she's curious about whether kind of integrating the linguistic analysis that we talk about on this podcast, integrating that with neurocognitive data could lead to stronger evidentiary tools. So just to kind of unpack this a bit, she's talking about whether could we use kind of EEG, fMRI data to detect neural patterns linked to stress or coercion. So if we've got a case where somebody is alleging that they produced a confession under duress, would any of those kinds of techniques help to supplement the linguistic research?
Okay, I think this is really intriguing. I've thought quite hard about it, and I think my answer is no, probably not. Okay. But to say a bit more, I think most of the allegations of coercion in police interviews or things like that are after the event, after the interview. So all you've got is the language data. You might have a video, but you can't wire a person up or put their head in a scanner during the police interview. No, okay. Right. So I don't think in that moment you can do something. I've also been thinking about whether could you do a post hoc experimental study where you somehow ask them the same questions again and see how stressed they get. That wouldn't tell you anything, I don't think.
No.
So maybe it's a failure of my imagination, but I can't quite see how we do these linking across pieces, the kind of techniques that measure someone's brainwaves, the EEG, live, and ask them questions and answers. That could be built into part of a polygraph or something like that. But as we've spoken about earlier, I'm skeptical in that direction too. So call me a skeptic about all this stuff. I'm not doubting that cognitive neuroscience is a valuable research endeavour and all the rest of it, but I struggle to see the application in our forensic context.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose it might be useful in sort of experimental context to kind of find things out about that sort of about a given situation, but when it comes to specific situations, there are practical barriers for bringing that in. Okay. So next we have another question that we're going to hear, and this is from Joseph Ball. So let's hear Joseph's question.
Hello, my name's Joseph Ball. I've just finished my first year of A-levels and I'm hoping to apply to study psychology and linguistics at university. I'm a massive fan of the podcast, and I had this question from the Imposters Tending to the Wild episode. It was said that you could recognise that the writer of two texts was not a native speaker of either language, Spanish or English. My question is, what qualities do you look for when trying to recognise a native speaker, as opposed to someone non-native who, say, has a very high level of English? And are these qualities which denote native speech or writing different in different languages?
Thank you, Joseph, for your question. I think you're studying the right A-levels if you're interested in forensic linguistics. Oh, you have your right plan for university if you're interested in forensic linguistics, and good luck with your studies. So there's a couple of questions that you've got in there. So there's the idea of how we recognise a native speaker. Say we're talking about text written in English, and the question is this a native speaker of English, or is some other language influencing their English? Okay. So first of all, that native speaker of English might have a very low competence in writing. So there may be all sorts of language errors in their English, in their written English. And indeed, their spoken English might be very non-standard. So we need to think about what sort of disfluencies or lack of agreement between in verbs or in nouns and things like that would indicate that someone was native but speaking a lower register of English, and versus someone who is non-native or not. And the principal theoretical idea is this idea that we call interlanguage. So if I'm now a Greek speaker of English, as was the case in Imposters Tending to the Wild, then how my English would be influenced by Greek might be different from how it was influenced by Spanish. And so we talk about an English-Spanish interlanguage where the syntax and the phrases that a Spanish speaker writing in English would use would differ from those from a Greek speaker. Mm. And we try and track those. And there's a whole set of lower level things that we can look at. So these aren't errors always. They can be errors, but they can be sort of unusual use of English. Mm. So I think we mentioned in the episode, it's been a long time since we recorded that one, but Spanish is a pronoun drop language. So you don't have to use pronouns in Spanish. Yeah. So rather than saying, I'm going out, you can just say going out. Mm-hmm. Because of the way the verb is formed, it includes the I bit in that information. And so a Spanish writer writing in English may use statistically fewer pronouns, mm-hmm. or they may use pronouns in an idiosyncratic way compared to with the native English speaker. And that might be quite different from the native speaker with a low level of language competence. Yeah. So you get a feel for this. Interestingly, we have research in the Institute now in Spanish, and our colleague Andrea Bertal is able to not only tell you where, reading the English language text, she can tell you whether the native speaker of Spanish is from Peninsular Spain, so from European Spain, or from Latin America, so Central and Southern American Spanish. But she will also be able to tell you whether they're from Mexico or Colombia. Yeah. Through the English. And it's mostly not through those low-level syntactic structures, the grammatical structures. It's mostly through the pragmatics, the politeness strategies. Mm-hmm. So her data, she picks out a lot of people who are making requests. And when you make a request of someone else, you try to do so politely. Mm-hmm. And that some areas, that politeness is very strong, and in other areas it's less strong. And so she's able to discriminate the dialect of a Spanish speaker when they're writing in English on the internet. And so this is the background research that we're using. Okay, so not just at the level of language, but actually sort of actually detecting the differences between dialects of a particular language. So we hope that's been helpful for Joe. And we hope to see you at Aston in a few years' time studying forensic linguistics with us. That would be a result for our podcast. Absolutely. So, Nicci, I've got a question from you here, and it's from an English teacher from Leicester. So maybe I don't know.
To do with you, probably.
Might be to do with me. I've got a little cluster of fans in Leicester, it seems. So this teacher asks, I was wondering how important slang is in forensic linguistics, especially as it seems to change so quickly over time and has so many different variants.
Well, yes, it's incredibly important. Actually, I think we get a large quantity of inquiries, particularly from police forces, asking for input on determining the meaning of slang items. We have an episode actually focusing on this, not just this issue, but this issue certainly plays into the episode that we have in season 2 on urban British English. So I would certainly strongly recommend that you keep your eyes open for that. It's a particular concern because obviously there are slang dictionaries out there, and we'll hear all about your kind of methods for determining meaning and the role of slang dictionaries. But the fact that they are out of date as soon as they're printed, pretty much, that slang, like lots of aspects, like all aspects of language, I guess, is constantly changing. It's organic, it's evolving, but not just that. Not only is it fast changing, but different groups will attach different meanings to different items. And I think you gave an example possibly in that episode, actually, where 2 buildings next to each other, the groups of youths that kind of hung out in the high rise as compared to the low rise next door had completely contradictory meanings for a particular word. I forget.
Yeah, it was the word plague.
Plague.
That's plague, that is, meaning that's really good for one group and that's really bad for another group.
Right. So because of that hyperlocality, it's obviously presents a really significant challenge because I think traditionally police officers that were sort of familiar with a particular area might go and testify as to the meaning of words that were in a message or transcribed from a phone call or whatever it might be. But when things are sort of subject to that kind of variation on such a micro level, it really sort of throws up a lot of challenges. But that is a lot of the work that we get involved in, certainly.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because some slang is very static in meaning, and some slang's really fast changing in meaning as well. So I think it's not entirely true, but sexual slang, names for acts or parts of the body or whatever, often goes back centuries.
Yeah.
And if you've not heard it, you don't know that particular word, you think it's entirely new, and it can be really local as well. So there's slang terms from Yorkshire that wouldn't be known in the Midlands, for example, and vice versa. Whereas other aspects of, even though they're 300 or 400 words old, and there's a good lexicographer of slang, Jonathan Green, and he produces these fantastic online slang timelines, and you can look at them. They come with a content warning. It's from the very crudest layers of sexual slang, but they're really interesting. What are really old words and what are newer words? Whereas if you're talking about drugs slang, that's so fast changing. As new drugs are developed and change, and the words for them change and so on.
Yeah.
So it's not all fast moving.
No. And I guess there are certain resources, and again, you can refer to that episode, which will be out soon. But there are online resources for determining the meaning of slang.
Everyone's favourite, Urban Dictionary.
Urban Dictionary. But there are, of course, very obvious problems with those resources, which is that anyone can write anything they want, anyone can upvote, downvote, anybody could put the examples, but we've got no means of kind of assessing how reliable it is. And there are many terms that never make it onto Urban Dictionary, because unless the people that are actually using it are also minded to go and sit down on Urban Dictionary, and why would it even make it there? Yeah, it's partial at best.
Absolutely.
So moving on to our next question, and this is from Chloe Stevenson, came in via email. And this is another one about the imposters tending to the wild. So this is the Izzy Clark episode. So the question is, how is AI, so widely used today, affecting this field of forensic linguistics? So she's speaking obviously about, in that episode, we were talking about comparative authorship analysis. So are you able to still track down culprits in the same way? Have you adopted AI tools to assist in this process? And what does the future hold for authorship modelling in forensic linguistics?
Okay, so that's a great question. So I think, yes, there's a recent Richard Osman book where he has his sort of cozy murder books, and he has a character who writes out using ChatGPT the whole time to disguise his language output, and whether this would defeat forensic linguistics or not.
Some of our colleagues wrote an article.
Yes,
about this,
and yes, there's an article in research news source called The Conversation, which Emily Chang wrote an article in with one or two others. So the answer is, of course, yes, AI is changing the world, and this ability to produce text using AI systems. So we refer to large language models, and ChatGPT is a version of a large language model. We develop software systems using AI, and we're interested in how AI is changing things. So we've had projects where we are looking at how capable AI is in writing criminal text. So if I'm a murderer and I murder someone and I want them to have a suicide note next to their body, can I get ChatGPT to write a suicide note? And if so, is it credible? Is it competent as a suicide note, or does it look really different from genuine ones? So this is some of the research we're doing. We're also using large language models to develop software in authorship analysis. And the question I guess we have is, to what extent is it easy to use, and how extensive will its use be in certain criminal contexts? Now, a lot of the texts we analyse in authorship cases are not criminal texts of themselves. They are the everyday text messages or emails of people to compare with a text that may or may not be a criminal text, to ask who wrote it. So those everyday emails are very unlikely. They're going to be affected by AI writing tools, but they're not going to be used for language disguise purposes. And it's not an either or. Either you write something with AI or you don't. You might draft something with AI and then correct it and personalize it, giving away your language features. If you're a non-native speaker, you might produce a version and say, make this sound like a native speaker. And so you get all these hybrid varieties of language. So yes, it's changing things. And yes, we're working both sides of that in a sense. We're writing detection tools as well as how these systems may be used. I think that, as with the work that we've done, Nicci, on undercover police officers and language disguise, the thing that the AI is really bad at the moment is the pragmatics layer.
Yes.
So what this means is what we're doing with the language. So AI can produce words in sentences, but can it be sarcastic like I am? Will it do politeness like you do? And so on and so forth.
And is it going to sort of take in all that information about? So obviously with that project, what we were doing was kind of training the tool, saying this is the language that you're this is the language of the person or the persona that you're aiming for. And so tell me if I give you this sentence, then how would they have written it, sort of thing. But I guess the question is that AI wouldn't be necessarily looking at how often does this person ask questions, how often do they give orders, or do they give compliments, or any of that, like you say, that sort of pragmatic level stuff. Like speech act theory, I don't think is something that AI is necessarily au fait with.
No, well, we're testing that proposition now. How good is it? And AI today is bad at it. Okay, AI in 5 years, who knows? But I don't think forensic linguistics is going away because of the revolution that's happening in AI. I think we will get more and more work because of it.
Yes, yeah, great.
So now we have a question from Liam, and Liam is a friend of Neus. And Neus is on our production team and is finishing her PhD here at Aston University. That's a terrible thing to say to a PhD researcher.
She's nodding.
She's in the room here and she's nodding at us. She's definitely finishing the PhD. So here's Liam's question. So it's definitely for you, Nicci. How would you distinguish between purposely inserted eggs to obscure meaning and the actual word egg? So what would happen if for some reason people want to disguise a conversation about eggs? How would you decipher it? Now, I'm going to give you a challenge here, Nicci. I'm going to give you a challenge before you get into the question. So as you know, I keep chickens, which lay a lot of eggs. So,
tiny eggs.
Tiny, they're bantams, in fact, rather than chickens.
Barely eggs.
So barely eggs at all. No, that's not true. As the bantams have grown, so is the size of the eggs. Right. But so we're having a covert conversation in which I'm asking you, Nicci, would you like poached eggs, scrambled eggs, or boiled eggs for breakfast? Can you say that in egg Latin for me?
Would you like pay-goached, fray-guide, or scray-gambled eggs for breakfast.
Excellent, brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was practicing how to say eggs and bacon in preparation for this
Okay,
question.
so I
but
sprung that
that was a bit more complex. So that was like
Yes.
rung up that. So yeah, I think it's a really good question. Essentially, I think you'd be able to you can tell because the original word is still identifiable. I guess it comes down to whether you've identified what the rule is. If you've identified that the rule is that egg is being inserted, then it doesn't matter if it's being inserted into the word box, bagox, or to the word egg. You can still spot it and you can isolate it and you can remove it. You know, in the remaining language will be the key to what's being said.
Excellent, thank you.
Is
No
that enough?
more challenges.
Okay.
Thank you, Nicci, for that one. And I've got another fun one to end on. So this is someone who's a fan of your McLeod's Murder Tours, which we've referred to on a couple of episodes. This is Nicci's propensity to go and visit gruesome sites. In episode 1, which was the Timothy Evans episode, you mentioned visiting various sites, including the grave of Timothy Evans. And my question has 2 parts. What usually happens to these places, like 10 Rillington Place? And do you have a dream tour? Where would you like to visit that you've yet to visit?
Okay, so the first question there, what happens to places like 10 Rillington Place? 10 Rillington Place was bulldozed, but that wasn't as a result of its kind of involvement in those grisly events that we heard about. It was standard kind of post-war slum clearing that went. But quite often what they'll do is they will demolish a property that's been involved in such sort of, horrendous events, out of respect and out of wanting to prevent people kind of trophy hunting, I suppose. So, for example, 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, which was the site of Fred and Rose West's serial murders, and it was found to be the kind of burial ground for 12 women that had been kind of tortured and murdered over a sort of 20-year period. That was demolished and turned into sort of a picturesque path that ran through a park and so on. 10 Waldlebrook Avenue, which is where the final Moors murder was committed. So this was Myra Hindley and Ian Brady's final victim was murdered then. That was also demolished for the same reason, that they don't want people coming and having their photo taken outside these properties. So it's not very respectful. So that is quite often what happens. And then on the question of what would be on my dream McLeod murder tour. Firstly, I should say we've described it as McLeod's Murder Tours. It's McLeod and Heine's Murder Tours. I didn't come up with this idea on my own.
This is Annie Heine, who worked here and is now abroad. Yeah.
Yes, and was my companion on the first on the original McLeod's Murder Tour. So if you on that tour we did we saw the graves of Timothy Evans, Derek Bentley. We did a walk along the route of the condemned man would take from Newgate to Tyburn Tree. We went to the Magdala pub where Ruth Ellis murdered her victim. And I've also, I have done sort of sporadic trips to quite, I guess it depends how macabre you want to be. And we've talked a lot about trying to kind of maintain the sensitivity while at the same time indulging in this kind of macabre obsession that we've got. And I guess it's trying to kind of maintain the balance between the two. But I have been, for example, talking of Fred West, I camped actually just at the gateway to the field where he buried his first 2 victims. And I swear to God, I woke up in the middle of the night and I could hear a metal shovel like digging into the ground. I'm absolutely convinced that was him who was there. But anyway, that's not for everyone. That's not kind of.
I don't think it's my idea of a camping trip. But there we go.
But I thoroughly enjoyed myself. But then perhaps the safer option, because that is probably a bit much. Perhaps the safer option. There are lots of wonderful prison museums around the country. There was somewhere I actually went to Annie to ask her advice on this question, and she told me about there's a museum where the door to the cell that used to hold Oscar Wilde is actually there as an exhibit. So there, lots kind of like interesting things like that. I did a quick Google search and there's lots of sort of top 10 prison museums to visit in the UK. So I guess those would be there. Depends on your tastes and which particular cases you're interested in and what floats your boat.
Yeah. And I'm saying rather you than me. So that brings to a close our questions and answers episode. I'm sorry if we've not featured a question that you've sent in, but do keep them coming because We've got Series 2 starting next month with a double bill on Derek Bentley.
Yeah.
So there's that to look forward to. And we're always interested in your questions, whether specific about what you've heard in an episode or more general about forensic linguistics.
And they can come to our email, which you're about to hear, or obviously feel free to reach out to us on social media, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, any of those methods.
Yeah, so if you've got a question, our email is writingwrongs@aston.ac.uk.
If you've been affected by any of the themes in this week's episode, please consider contacting the resources in the episode description.
This has been Writing Wrongs, an original podcast series from the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics at Aston University. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.